Well, I've put together a presentation about model railroad backdrop murals for you, as per Dick's request. And when I was trying to come up with a little presentation, organize my thoughts, I came up with a plan. I came up with a discussion that we can get into. What I'd like to talk to you about is the elements that make up a really good model railroad backdrop mural. And for all intents and purposes, we're just going to call them murals because that's what I'm familiar with, and so that's what I feel like I can speak of. And really, a model railroad backdrop is a mural. So I'm going to use that term mural, and that's what I'm speaking of. It's a lot easier to say than to keep saying model railroad backdrop. And you all come with different layouts or different plans for future layouts and different tastes and so forth. And you all have varying levels of expertise in that area. So so I'm interested, of course, in hearing your feedback at the end. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you an overview of some of the elements that in my opinion, create a really outstanding mural. Okay?
Kind of like the one next door.
Thanks. The elements that I use in my work, I'm a professional mural artist, so this is what I bring to the table as a professional. So I've come up with 4 components or elements that I work with on a daily basis, and I've tried to organize those in a way that give you an idea of the challenges that you might face when conquering these elements, these components, and then some tips for success. So hopefully you'll walk away with some good advice at the end. So I'm going to break those 4 things down just a little bit and talk about them briefly. And then I'm going to do a little bit of demonstration. I don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet, but I've got some paint, so we'll wing it. And then I will open it up for questions and discussion afterwards. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, great.
Does everybody like my plan? Good.
Good plan.
Good plan. All right. And I've also come up with some very, very basic visuals. And this I did at the last minute because I thought some people really like to read along with a speaker and be able to take notes if you want. And we also have a professional videographer, Phil, who is videotaping the presentation. So it's my understanding that it'll be available online or at some point in some medium to refer to later. So if you wanted to play it back and get anything out of it, you can do that. But feel free to take notes.
You have to say your name and phone number on this.
Today is January. and I will introduce myself. Thank you. My name is Amy Colburn, and I hold a BFA in visual communication design with a concentration in illustration. So essentially, I am an illustrator. I work currently as a full-time mural artist, and I also do hand-painted furnishings and custom artwork, and I also do part-time graphic design. So I wear a lot of different hats. The elements of a mural that I'm going to talk to you about today, I've illustrated this in a way that hopefully will convey the point that I want to make. The point that I want to make is that these elements are interrelated. So the 4 things that I've broken this down into are perspective and scale, color, subject matter, content, which is the same thing, and then execution. And I think that those 4 things there's not one particular thing that's more important than another, which is why I drew it in a circle. I also think that planning will keep all these elements from rolling around in chaos. I think that if you have good planning, then you have a nice, neat little package here. So that's why I've illustrated it this way. Hopefully that kind of will stick in your head. Now, I also so I wanted to make a point too, that a funny anecdote, because Dick and I joke about how when we first met and I was first consulted to design a mural for his backdrop, for his model railroad backdrop, he asked me not to make sure it was not too good, because he had put a lot of work into his layout and he didn't want the mural to overshadow what he had done. Now, Dick is an expert in model railroad modeling, and his layout is, bar none, the best I've seen. I haven't seen very many, but I know that you're an expert in what you do, and in your scenery building and so forth. And I had to laugh because no one had ever asked me to paint something and hire me potentially to do something that was not that good. So I thought, I really don't know exactly what he means, but I'll do my best, I guess, to not make it too good. But essentially what I have arrived at after a couple of months of working with Dick is that, in my opinion, I really think that a good backdrop, whether or not it's a full painted mural or whatever it is that you choose to use as a backdrop, I think that if it's done properly, if it's done really well, that it can enhance your layout. And I want to, put that point in your head that maybe instead of looking at it as, as just a backdrop, that it's really part of your layout, that it's part of the story, that, the story doesn't stop at the wall, that the wall is not just there to hold the ceiling up, but it's really part of the layout. And I think that your whole layout can be, the value of it, the experience can be elevated with a really high quality mural. So, without further ado, I'm going to talk about each of these elements in this circle down here, and I'll keep that up. Perspective and scale. The challenges of perspective and scale. Now, and the funny thing is with model railroad enthusiasts is that you usually start off conversations with one another in terms of scale. When you meet someone, well, what's your scale? I mean, this is a thing that we cover in the very beginning of when you're planning a layout, when you're working on your models. Scale is everything. So that also translates to a mural. Your scale and your proportion are absolutely critical for building that story and making sure that story doesn't turn into Alice in Wonderland with trees that are gargantuan or little miniature people, that the scale carries out into the backdrop. And that's something that takes a lot of planning because it depends on whether or not your wall is right next to the mural or next to the backdrop, or whether or not it's, in Dick's case, there's a walkway in between. We had a little bit of room there. Well, what distance is that? What do these things look like? How far away are they, and how big would they be? How small would they be? All those kinds of things, if they're not planned out, can be really distracting. An example would be in Dick's mural is there's a mine in the background of the mountain range behind where the mine is and the layout. And we had planned on putting a mine there, and we kind of sketched it out, and it was probably about maybe an inch or so big. And then we really got to working on the scale, and we measured out and got a calculator out and figured out about how far away that mine would be and how big it was. And it ends up being about the size of my pinky fingernail. So really, we trusted our own eye. We figured we could eyeball it. But in reality, we were way off. So really, don't trust your brain. Don't trust the eyeball it. You really have to plan that stuff out and measure. And that really makes a big difference. Tips for success. Use rulers, level, T-square, tape, pencil, chalk, string. These are the kinds of things that I carry around with me onto every job. I use the tools, and sometimes I think, oh, I can just eyeball this. I've done this dozens of times, and then at the last minute, get those tools out, and I realized that I was off by a little bit, and that can really make a big difference. Water does not fall downhill. I mean, a waterfall does, but a lake doesn't tilt like this. And if you just eyeball it and think it's straight, that can be so distracting because immediately your visitors are going to be thrown off by the water that's tilted or the trees that are all leaning. You would be surprised at how hard it is to draw a short straight line that's plumb. So get the level out. I carry a level with me all the time, and I'm constantly using it to just do landscapes, which you wouldn't think you would need to be square and level, but it's really important to do that. And research and sketch what you see. A lot of times I will set up a little model. I'll actually lay out, okay, this will be a car, this will be a tree. And actually sit down and look and see, is the car bigger than the tree, and what kind of scale, what kind of proportion. And if you do that with your models, you can easily do that and translate it into a picture for your mural, and actually take a photograph of it. And that's a really big tip. I photograph everything. I always use reference. When I paint, I'm always taping pictures up on the wall to be able to refer to, and it's so helpful to use them. Now you can go online and Google just about anything that you want a picture of, and if you use Google, there's an image search. So you can actually search for whatever you're looking for and click images, and you'll come up with millions of different pictures of something. So, I visit the library, I walk outside and just take pictures, and that's really, really helpful for shadows, for lighting. We'll get into color and lighting a little bit, but without sounding like a broken record, it's the shadows, the cast shadows are really an important part of your layout. And if the sunlight is in a certain angle, those shadows are going to be cast on the landscape in a certain way. And if all those shadows need to go in the same direction. So that's something that's a really common mistake that I see, where the shadows from the trees are kind of going everywhere, and that in your brain says, that just doesn't make sense to me. So stuff like that is a detail that will really, like I said, elevate your whole picture to a new level. And decide on your light source. So if maybe it's not a sunny day, maybe it's an overcast day, maybe your background is going to be really, really simple and not, what do I want to say, not specific to a certain season or a certain time of day, that kind of thing. Maybe you don't want to be that specific in your mural, and that's okay. But if you do have a source of light or something like that, that has to be consistent. So in terms of scale, the shadows scale, and color and placement. Another common mistake that I see in murals and backdrops that I've seen in pictures of is that the tree will have a shadow, and the shadow doesn't touch the tree. And that's something that you need to make sure that the shadows are touching the objects, because the shadow would never just wander off from the object. Stuff like that can make a big difference. All right, let's talk about color for just a minute. The challenge is to, creating a backdrop and using color is that sometimes the colors can look too saturated and too cartoony, if you will. And the way to get around that is to mix your colors. So a lot of times, like I've been researching now with becoming friends with Dick, the magazines and the Model Railroad magazines, and I've been looking through these, and they'll give tips about how to create backdrops and how to paint your backdrop. And they'll say, these are the colors you need. Get this particular kind of blue, this particular kind of green, and this particular kind of white, and you'll be all set. Which is fine if you just want to have a sky or just something very simple, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to have that picture, that story, what I would suggest is getting a full palette of colors. And a full palette of colors looks like something like this, where you have red, yellow, and blue, which is your primary colors. You have brown and you have green, which are your secondary colors, And this is, you know, like primary school, like, you know, the color wheel and the whole bit. And it hasn't changed in many, many years. It's the same color wheel. The reason that you want to use green and brown is because they're secondary colors, is because you're going to use those in a landscape quite often. So I always use green and brown, and then of course black and white. My tips for success are to always mix your colors, and don't trust that, oh, how do I put it, that your tree is always going to be green and the trunk is always going to be brown and snow is always going to be white and the sky is always going to be blue. Because if you walk outside, and take a look at things for what they are, they're not always the color that we think they are. Your brain sees a tree and goes, okay, it's a green tree. But your eye is fighting with your brain and saying, but it's not. There's yellow and there's blue and there's red and there's brown and there's black and there's gray all in that tree. And so you have to kind of stop listening to your brain sometimes and look at your eye. Listen to your eyes, if that makes any sense to you. And you can, and this is a beautiful, this is the Handmade Tree, isn't that right?
That's from the Mackenzie brothers in California.
This is gorgeous. The tree itself, when hit with different light sources, is going to have a different color. And you can actually, a really good tip, something that I do frequently, is to take a piece of paper, any paper will do, preferably black, but it doesn't have to be black, and cut a hole in it, about this size, but in 1 inch square, and actually hold it up to your eye and look at different objects, not for the object, but for the color you see on the paper. And then you'll start to see things and go, you know, snow in January on an icy day isn't white. It's actually blue and purple and yellow, and the way that sunlight hits things makes different colors. So when you look at a tree and look at the different variations of colors, that's what's going to make that come to life in a painting. My best advice for, you know, for painting and for, you know, running out and getting supplies to actually do this is to get some acrylic paints and get the basic colors, whatever you need, and do not leave the store without yellow ochre. Yellow ochre equals sunshine, and it equals life. This is a color that I never leave home without, literally. It's probably running through my veins. It's a mineral, comes from the earth, and yellow ochre there's something in here that makes things just pop out. When it you can use yellow, you can use sunshine yellow, you can use cadmium yellow, but yellow ochre has a quality about it that, when mixed with different colors, brings out sunshine. And so if you want that life, that sunshine in your paintings, this is a really good tip to use. Another thing that I like to do is create an underpainting, and this is kind of a more classic technique for creating murals, creating paintings, and that is basically to do a whole painting in a bright color like an orange or a blue, and then creating your natural colors on top of it. So in other words, you would create your mountain range or your tree range or a big hill or a mountain and make it a bright, obnoxiously bright color like an orange or even a rusty red, something that is the opposite of the color that you're going to be using. The color wheel, and I don't have an example of a color wheel, I should have brought one, but the color wheel, the opposite color on the color wheel is very important, because you use the opposite color to create shadow. You also create lightness and brightness with the opposite color. So here's an example. And again, I'm going to refer to the mural in the train room. For the hills and the valleys that we created along the lake, underneath all that green and all those trees is a whole layer of like a rusty red orange. And I did that on purpose with that color and created that curve of the land with just one color and white, and just created the, you know, the nooks and crannies and the form with that one color. Let it dry, and then put green on top of it. And paint is translucent. In fact, when you go to the art store and get certain kinds of paint, I don't think all of the acrylic paints do this, but this brand, Golden, does have on the back, it has a little gauge, a chart that tells you how opaque and translucent your paint is. And this is really valuable when you're trying to layer paint. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you're just when you just want to paint a flat, if you're painting a train car, you're just going to get a tube of paint and you're going to paint it, and that's the end of it. But if you're working in a landscape painting and you want to layer, this is really helpful to know how much light is going to come through and layer. It's a lot of fun to practice with. This is what I did earlier today. I took actually just one color of green, okay, and I created all of these shades of green with just these colors. So what I did was I took the green that's on here. This is just a hunter green, and I mixed it with each one of the or more of these colors and ended up with all of these colors. Now I did this on vellum so that I could actually, see how they layered over a red color. And I often do this when I'm trying to, come up with different color ideas. And I can pass this around. You can just take a look at it. It's just acrylic paint. But it's interesting to me, though, how many colors you can achieve just by mixing. And this is what's really going to make a tree like this come to life. Because you can really pick out all those colors in this tree, in different lights. I mean, this is not natural light, but I bet if we had a natural light source, you'd be able to see all those colors in the tree. Here, I'll just pass that around.
Is it dry?
Oh yeah, it's dry.
I'll let you know.
Okay, subject matter. The challenges or common mistakes when going to do a backdrop is that
Okay.
A lollipop has like a stick and then a ball on top, and that would be like a deciduous tree, but it had a lollipop. So I just thought I'd throw it out there. I think the challenge is you got the tree down. Like, this is looking good. I have a great tree. I'm gonna make 1 million of them, and you make 1 million of them, and then you got to at some point stop and say, okay, now we have to change trees. So I think in Dick's layout, I drew inspiration from the fact that he mixes a lot of different trees, and he has different reasons for doing that. But I like how in the layout, and really in your layouts too, if you want to be inspired, go look at what you do with a landscape with these kind of trees. It would look unnatural, of course, to have these trees 2 inches apart in a grid, in a scale, unless you had a tree farm that was planted that way. And so in order to make a natural landscape, think about how trees would actually be. You'd have some scrub trees and some deciduous trees and a couple of pines in the back. And so the best way to know how to put where to put trees is to just look around, drive around. Look at nature, look at pictures, take pictures, and that's the best way to do it, is to use reference. And I use reference constantly because I never want to trust myself to put something there unless that's what really happens in nature. Make decisions about what you want to do before you even pick up a paintbrush. Plan out. Remember our planning? Here, I should put this in the front here. Planning is the key. Decide what era, what season, the structures, the roads. Is this an era where there's telephones and telephone poles? Is this an era where there's... Now, in the layout that's here, Dick and I had many discussions about the lake, about Cuckoo Lake, and he'd obviously done a lot of research for his layout about Penyan and Bath and the railroad, and so he was very knowledgeable about how many cottages there would be on the lake and what they would look like and how many miles apart they would be, and we looked at pictures. We have lots of reference material so we could see the layout and see what Cuckoo Lake doesn't look the same today as it did 100 years ago. So we really have to look at a lot of reference, and it looks drastically different, believe it or not. So a lot has changed in just, and it's just a landscape, it's just trees and water, but a lot can change. And so those are important decisions to make before going ahead with making your backdrop, and deciding where things are going to go and how they're going to transition. You know, that's a really big step, to go from a lake to a mountain range within a couple inches. Well, what's in between? How are we going to get there? And those kinds of decisions you have to make ahead of time, because when you get to the wall, it's really not the place to try and just say, okay, we're going to stop it here and start a new geography just a few inches away. So all those decisions are really helpful to make ahead of time. And actually, you know, you can paint or draw on the wall. You can, you know, put tape on the wall. A lot of times I'll just tape off, you know, different sections and kind of plan it out in my head. I create full paintings, you know, on a board like this before even painting a mural. And a lot of times it's easy to see something in a painting and go, I'm glad I did that ahead of time, because it's not really what I wanted it to look like. So, and then it's on a small scale, and you can make those changes on a smaller scale rather than making them on a wall, which is, you know, costly, and it's a big, you know, a production to try and paint over it and start all over again. And finally, execution. The challenges or the common mistakes for the execution, like I said, these are all interrelated, and I've touched on a couple of these points before. But you know, really, after conquering all these different elements and all these different components, putting the mural or putting your painting on a wall, doing your backdrop, that's the most important thing. That's what everyone's going to see. So that takes a lot of care, attention to detail, making sure that you've taped off your workspace. Make sure you have a plan for finishing it off. You know, is it going to stop here? Is it going to stop at the corner? Are we going to go to the ceiling? If not, what do we do with that part? Do we have some of the wall paint? You know, whenever you are, you know, going to start the project is when you would then find the gallon of paint that you put away, the wall paint that you have in storage that's extra for touch-ups, because that's really an important part of it, is touching up. No, as neat as everyone is, there's always going to be a little room for errors. So make sure you have your touch-up paint available before you start, so that you don't have to stop working and go find that. Make sure you prepare your work surface, and that you have a staging area for your paint. You know, I had the wonderful luxury of working in Dick's basement here. I have a lot of space, and we had a whole table that I could stage the paint, have my tools out and ready to go, have plenty of water. I use a huge bucket of water to wash brushes in, have my brushes laid out, everything's out, because the acrylic paint dries quickly. So you know, you don't have a lot of working time. So it's not like you can just say, well, we'll, you know, stop everything and then get all my cleaning supplies out and then clean and then go back and after lunch and everything's going to be dry. So make sure you have enough room and that you're not stepping on your paint, that you're not dumping over cans of paint. You know, that stuff is important, because it can really put a damper on it. It can really just, you know, just bum you out, really. So I also have storage for your colors that you've already mixed, because you might want them again. So if you've mixed something and you've spent that time mixing a really good color, save it, because you might want to go back and retouch up something. When you're working on a surface like a wall, it takes a lot of paint to cover the wall. This isn't, you know, when you paint your, you know, your wall with a roller, you're putting gallons of paint on that wall. If you think about it in terms of that, you know, when you paint, you know, a mural or a backdrop, you know, this isn't going to cover it. You know, this is just not going to do anything for you. And what happens with acrylic paint is, because it's the polymer, the vehicle that drives the pigment in the paint, when it dries, it contracts slightly. And so, and when the water or medium that you use evaporates from it, it cracks a little bit. So you're gonna see little cracks and sort of you think you've covered it, and then you go back and think, why are all these little dots in there? And that's the fact that the acrylic paint, when it dries, contracts a little bit. So make sure you use lots and lots of paint, and then plan to go back over it again, because it's usually not going to take one time, even 2 times, even 3 times to really cover it. And don't be afraid of using the paint. You know, you can actually create a lot of texture with paint, and that could be to your advantage, to using a lot of paint and really building it up and getting that texture. I think that I have covered all 4 of the elements. So before I go and try and paint something right now, does anybody have any questions about anything that I've talked about?
Amy?
Yes.
You talked about the mistakes that model railroaders make, etc.
Yeah.
So I brought out my first and only attempt at backdrop painting. So you can
I actually think this is really good.
We don't.
Are these your pies? You're giving these people pie?
It's not bad. It's not bad if you're shooting a model and it's like 2 or 3 feet and it's blurry. You know, yeah, for a little. But I thought that'd be a good example of, you know, amateur, somebody who is definitely not an artist.
Well, okay, so let's see what you've taken away from what I've said. Can anyone make a comment?
On the back side of the execution poster, in the middle, somewhere you said, do research, take pictures.
Yeah.
My problem is I can take a picture and I don't know what I'm looking at. Until somebody writes an article and says, well, you know, trees grow smaller at the top of the hill and then they get bigger as you come down.
And
I see it, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, and you don't, because your brain is, you're walking around with a brain that thinks that it knows everything. Right?
That's the problem.
Exactly.
You got
Susie catches a soul. Not only is she a good artist, she's pretty perceptive.
And that's true with us all, actually. Because what happens is, your brain thinks, I know what that looks like because I see it all the time.
Right.
And you stop seeing it for what it is. And that's why I think it's important to look at, when you observe nature, is really take a good look at things. I think that the exercise where you cut the little square in a piece of paper would be really helpful a really helpful exercise to be able to see something for not the object that it is and not the space that it's in, but actually what you're looking at. And actually, you know, take and measure that, okay? That tree is, when I look at that tree, it's 1 inch tall from this direction, from my standpoint. That tree is, you know, 20 feet behind it, and it's you know, 1/4 inch. So really, it's a matter of retraining your brain to look at things, and it takes some practice, and it takes. There's also some rules that you can get from a book. Like, there's actually formulas that if you wanted to create like a fence post, for instance. Like a split rail fence, okay? Let's say something that would be like a reasonable thing for a layout to have would be like a farm with a fence. Now, there's a formula for creating a fence that goes into the distance, and to know how. So when that fence post is going off in the distance, say it's going over the crest of a hill, those fence posts are going to be shorter as they go into the distance, and they're also going to be slightly closer together, okay? And you have the angle of the rails is going to then converge as they go into the distance. And this is an exercise that people have studied for, you know, millions of years, or, you know, that they can actually say, okay, so the first one is and the second one are, you know, say they're 3 inches apart, then you go down a certain percentage for the next post, and then a certain percentage for the next post. It's not even, they're not evenly spaced. They get closer together as you go in the distance. And then they get thinner as well. So all of those things play into our belief then, after you've painted this, of saying, yeah, it's a split rail fence, and yeah, it goes off in the distance. So those are just little formulas that you can use to actually create perspective in your painting. You know, you guys use scale all the time in your models. You know, when you say, okay, 1/87th scale, so I know how big this train is compared to this tree or this bridge or whatever that you're building, and take that right to the painting and say, how big is this tree that I'm painting? Okay, I want it to be a 16-foot tree. So do the math and rely on math and science rather than your brain, because you're gonna say, well, I know what it looks like because I see it all the time, and your brain is really gonna prohibit you from being able to make sense of it when it comes to executing it on the painting. Another really great way of creating perspective is with color. See how, remember I said they're all interconnected. So perspective and color are very, very much relying on one another. So if you wanted to make something back in the distance, like a mountain range, for instance, those colors that you use for the distance are going to be lighter and they're going to be cooler. Okay, cool colors like blue. Well, blue is the cool color. Blue added to green or added to gray is going to make that push that back into the distance. If you want something to look like it's in the foreground or in the closer to you, then you would use warm colors like yellow, and you would add more yellow and red, brown, warm colors to the foreground. Now, the interesting thing is you can have green be cool and warm. So green, in a range of a mountain range or hills with trees on them, you can create that distance, that depth. It's all green, it's all trees, but the trees in the back are small. In fact, in some cases, you wouldn't even be able to see the definition of trees. It would just sort of be a mass. You know, it would just be a blur. Cool in the background, and then warmer and more detailed as you get closer to the viewer or closer to the layout. And you can really play into that with your layout if you have the advantage of having your layout come right up to the mural and actually have things. You know, I know there's tricks of like cutting things in half and like actually adhering them to the wall and having them, so you can actually play up that perspective and have a seamless scene, you know, and have the scene continue right off into the distance.
Can you talk a little bit about you had on there, I believe it was under color, intensity, and thinning the paint, and saturation, and also allude to, you were talking about cool colors. A lot of times people will add white to make things lighter, and that just screws up chromatic value.
I did put on here, and I didn't really speak of it at all, but I did put on here that, and that brings up a good point about the use of black, and it also pertains to the use of white as well. Black is an extremely strong, powerful color, but it also can really prohibit your painting from being believable and lifelike. Black really will take away. Black is not a color. Black is the absence of color. So in terms of physics, it's not really a color, but we use it as a color, and so the natural tendency is to use black as a shadow, and white to highlight something. And what I would like you to do is to not do that, because basically what's going to happen is your shadow is going to become a hole. It's going to become a black hole. So in order to have that lifelike shading, you would mix then the opposite color on the color wheel. So grass, a shadow cast on grass. So you have your grassy field and you've got trees along the edge of your field, and they're casting, the sun is behind them and they're casting a shadow. Your shadow would be green because the grass is green. Your shadow is not going to be any other color than what the item is, because it's not like, you know, you don't, the shadow isn't an object. The shadow's not like you can pick it up and move it. So it's the color of the grass, but it's the color of the grass in a darker shade, which would be mixed with red. It would be the opposite on the color wheel. And this is all just scientific, you know, physics. It's not, this isn't the artistic, you know, eye. This is like been, this is what, like the painting 101, right? You're talking about, like, you know, this is just like the basics. This is, so you would take for your shadow the green plus red, which would darken it just enough. And I can show you a little bit about that with paint.
Would that apply to rock castings, you know, the rock faces?
Yes, absolutely.
Because what the modelers do, they do exactly what you said not to do. They get their colors on, and then they say, okay, all the places where the shadows, we'll
give it a wash of black.
We'll put black in those holes, and then we'll take a little dry brush with the white, and we'll do the tips. And Dave
what you've done right there
is books, you know, and on and on.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well, what you've done there is you've made black and white make what? Gray.
Gray.
And
gray rocks are boring.
But gray can be achieved with color, and then you have, all of a sudden you've got a rock face that looks like it's a real rock, because real rock is not gray. Real rock is a neutral color. It's not gray. It's not the absence of color. So let me show you actually what I mean by that. But does it? So I touched on one thing that you said, but the other point that you wanted
saturation.
to was the saturation, and that is all about saturation. Is adding colors, mixing those colors together. But another point was that was the mixing, like water, like making it too thin. There are products that you can buy in the craft store and the art store that will that you can add to your color, to your paint, while you're mixing it to thin it. Try to limit your use of water, because a lot of what I see in the backdrops is that we want it to be thin, so we add a bunch of water to it, and all that does is lessen the amount of paint that's on the wall. And then you're just going to have to add more paint. So rather than add water, there are products called mediums that will give you different finishes. And, you know, there's some that are matte and some that are gloss.
Acrylic matte medium?
Yeah, we use it to glue down.
We use it for glue.
It tastes good, too.
Well, what it frosting, buttercream frosting, and matte medium. I didn't realize it could be used as glue, but that's what you would add to paint to retard the drying time. So basically, what it does is it adds time, and it thins it out enough without actually putting water in. The water isn't going to stay on your wall.
Right.
You know, water doesn't do anything for you. All it does is wash your brushes. Water does not help, because water disappears. So if you think about it in terms of that, whatever you put, if it helps you put that paint on the wall, great, but then it's going to go away. But the matte medium will actually help you. It'll actually stay on the wall. So if you want something to be translucent, if you want something to be, you know, thinned out, use a matte medium or a gloss medium. They have different finishes.
There's your matte right there.
Yeah.
No, I'm right here.
Oh, that's
matte large and matte medium. Does that touch on your question? Yes. Super.
You forgot to mention the magic eraser for all of this.
The magic eraser.
It's called the roller and the color paint. You screw off, you just paint over it.
And Kills is a product that will cover your paint. Kills is a primer that that I have been known to use, and it will cover whatever you have on your wall. So yes, when in doubt, you can actually just start all over again.
I gotta have a magic eraser.
A magic eraser. Yeah.
Amy, you mentioned one thing, mixing. I have found that it's always a good idea to try and record something about the measurement when I mix paints. With liquids, it's very easy. I can measure by drops or ounces. With heavy-bodied paints out of tubes, I try and estimate with inches. How many inches I've squeezed out.
That you squeezed out. That's a
because
really good way
I might want to try to match it a week later or a year later.
if you want to save, if you have a palette and you say, oh, that color right there in between the blue and green and red, that right there is what I need, and I don't know how to recreate it, you can say, what I do is I use press and seal, like the stuff that, it's like saran wrap, but it actually sticks. And I will keep something indefinitely in an airtight container. But yeah, you can't always recreate that one little color that you've mixed 7 different colors of with different dabs and different.
Yeah, especially if you've mixed more than 2.
Yeah. So what I do is I keep my palettes, and then I have something to refer to, and I can say, oh yeah, okay, I can see those 3 colors are next to it. I can kind of recreate that.
How long do they last in case we, you know, we're squeezing by that 17-inch aisle back there?
Yours are gone. I can recreate any color on there.
Oh, okay, sure.
That just kills works.
That's just yeah, that's just an experience. I just know what I've done on there, so I can just match any color. But there's a lot of times though when I'm like, this is a color. Now let me. So do we have time to
sure.
do a little painting?
I'd love to see it.
Have you changed something?
Okay, so and no whites on this in this little thing. But
Steve, don't ask that question.
No, I want to know.
I don't know if
Well, we kind of planned as we went along, you know.
Yeah. So so say you're going to be doing a couple different trees. The best advice I have for trees is to build them the way that they grow. You know, think about in terms of, you know, the tendency is to be like, okay, we're going to do them from top to bottom, like just put some green on and then you add the trunk as an afterthought. But really, you need to put that trunk all the way up the tree because it will add stability to the tree. I know it sounds crazy, but it really does work because, like I said, the paint is translucent. You know, if I do this, if I just do, you know, my tree here, you know, and then just add the trunk later, then we get the lollipop effect. Remember how I said, you know, so, and it's just not going to be as believable. So if you're going to build a tree in your painting, just go ahead and build it like it grows right up to the top. So the trunk gets smaller as it goes up to the top. It's at least a good idea just to build, you know, look at different kinds of trees and how the branches grow. Sometimes the branches will actually go down. Sometimes they'll go up. How many branches roughly are on the tree? All that stuff is really important when you go to paint the tree. This isn't the most steady, you know, board. It's not like a wall. But if you have some idea of the structure of the tree, this will help with actually building the tree. I mean, with painting it. And it sounds redundant. It sounds like, well, but no one's going to see that part. But this is the you know, like I said, the things that make a difference, the details that really make a difference. So when you're building, I mean, look at all the color. I have all the colors in here. Blue, green, red, yellow, and brown. And I'm mixing all of them together to make the tree not just green and brown, and no white and no black. So the highlights would then be I would use yellow to make the highlights to make that sunshine appear. So let's say we're going to start by just building the basic tree. Now, a deciduous tree, you can see through it, you know? Now, this is something that is you need to plan out because you don't want to have white behind your tree. So you're going to put your tree on after you've done everything else because that tree grew in front of the sky. You can't paint the sky after the tree. So that's a really important, I think, you know, that's something that, you know, it can't be an afterthought. It can't be like, oh, wait, I forgot to put the sky in. Because then the sky is going to come up to the edge, and you would see the sky through the tree. So, and depending on what the season is, you can, you know, you add all kinds of colors. In fall, obviously, in autumn, you're going to have lots of different colors in the tree. So, a little bit more water here. So I'm adding all these colors in. And I can layer and layer and layer, but look at how, you know, you see very little green yet. But all these colors are adding the depth. A tree is not flat. A tree is round. and the branches come out from all different directions. So you want to be able to build it the way it appears in nature. So, so start and just keep going around the tree and adding the leaves in and keeping some of the space in between the branches and in between the tree. And now I'm using a pretty small brush because I want to get the definition of the leaves in, but I'm not really paying attention to that in the beginning. I'm just shaping it. You know, you don't want to go in there and be painting every single leaf on every single tree. It's unrealistic. So use as big of a brush as you, or smaller brush as you feel comfortable with in the beginning. And this is what I mean by layering. So you're just going to lay it on there and see how it looks. Now, you know, a tree is pretty forgiving because, you know, you could have lots of different branches, lots of different leaves. And if it doesn't look right, you can just change it. It's really, really forgiving. Trees are a lot of fun and you can practice with them. Just make sure that they're not consistent, that they look as random and inconsistent as possible, because that's how trees grow. And then after you kind of build around the back of the tree, if you go in with a light color, like I'm mixing green and yellow, and really get into that yellow, and my yellow ochre, which I had up here, so I didn't put it on my palette yet. And that's going to add highlight.
Can we see that yellow before you start mixing it?
The what?
Can we see that yellow ochre before you start mixing it?
Just
yeah.
What it looks like.
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay.
Mustard. There you go.
Yeah, it looks like mustard. It is the color of
Go to the refrigerator.
mustard.
Yeah, great.
So the color that I have is a really bright
Is that great and blonde friend?
Yes.
color. So now is when I would add the detail that's going to pull out. So my sunlight is right about up at the end of that light. At the end of this, right about there. It's coming in from this angle.
So you're going to have more of the yellow on the left side.
On the left side, and it's going to come from the top.
Right.
And the leaves that are underneath it are going to be a shadow, because those are not getting sunlight. So the sunlight is you actually want that sunlight to have a direction, and so you're creating the sunshine. You're creating the sunlight where it's going to hit the tree, and I like to really add a lot of different strokes, a different size dabs, if you will, or strokes of the brush, so that it doesn't look like I'm making little polka dots. And there's nothing wrong with little polka dots. I mean, George Seurat is a famous impressionist who painted all kinds of stuff with polka dots. I have nothing against dots, but in my style is to use that brush, and I'm constantly turning it and twisting it, and I use a lot of different kinds of brushes. I even use the brushes that are dead, or that have no, hardly any bristles. I use them for all kinds of things because they can have their purpose. So I'm creating light just on the tops of the branches of the bunches of leaves. See how that works?
You're also gripping the shaft way back from the ferrule.
I am, and that's because I like to have it moving. If I'm holding my brush way up here, you notice that if I'm holding my brush way up here, I have a lot of control, which I don't want in this case. I want that brush to go where it's going to go, and sometimes it kind of slips around and moves the paint around, and that's okay. That's going to create a lot of different variation in the leaves. And then I can go in and add my pure green, and then I'm going to make this look like an actual tree, because now I've got all the colors on there, and when I add the green, it's actually going to come to life and look like a tree. And you can go and do this. I mean, I've only been working on this one for maybe a minute or so, and actually when you get going, you can create those trunks and create the trees and really get into this. And what I would suggest is working in groups, working in a tall one. You don't want to, what you want to do is create the background first and then the foreground, because the tree in the foreground you're going to be able to see through, remember? So you can't work backwards. You can't put something in the background after you've put something in the foreground. That just doesn't work.
I can work on mine for hours and it doesn't even look as good as that.
Yeah, find out who's working on it.
That's what I'm saying.
Consider the
Remember,
source.
Steve, dots,
So
bibs.
Talent will
Airbrush.
out, Steve.
Regular
Amy,
brush.
Yeah.
Big difference.
What's wrong with an airbrush?
When you get to the edge of your tree, the surrounding edge,
Yeah.
there's almost like a halo on a tree. If you look at outside and you see on a sunny day, the outer leaves don't have anything behind them. They don't have other leaves behind them, and so they're almost translucent. They're really light. They're almost like this yellow, green color, really light, and they almost create like a little halo. So if you do that around the very, very edge of the tree, it really adds a lot of sunlight. I'll show you.
These are the new growth trees, the leaves, the new
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah, exactly. And they
Because they're
don't
nice
have
and
anything
thin
behind
and
them.
light colored.
Yep, and they don't have
Early summer.
in these trees.
Spring.
You know, you've got lots going on in the center of the tree. You have more leaves in the center because it's where the tree grows, and it grows out to the edge. So the edge, these are really light, and they have nothing behind them. And I even like to put a couple branches out where you can't even see the branches because the branches are just kindling. They're just little tiny kindling. So you can hardly see them. And that adds a lot of life to your tree. Now you still want highlight in the middle, but it's only gonna come from the top. It's not you're gonna have no highlights underneath the tree like that. Now, when you go to then do the trunk, now after you've done the leaves, then you can go back in and work on your trunk because now you know where the shadow is. There's not a highlight on the trunk where the leaves are. The trunk doesn't get any light. It's all hidden by the leaves. So you're only going to get light way down here where the sunlight's going to hit your, where the sunlight is going to hit, I've got too much paint now on my brush. Where the sunlight is going to hit your trunk. So, let's try this. I got a new brush. Maybe a little grab. So you have a shadow on the tree trunk from the trees. So the highlight is only going to happen down here on one side. You can't have highlight on both sides of your tree unless you have two light sources.
Like in your model railroad room, where you have lights coming from all different
Right.
Multiple
If there's a bus coming with headlights from this direction and sunlight's coming from that direction.
Now, when you did the mural over there,
Yeah.
Amy, when you did the mural in the train room, was the sun in the same place for the whole room, or just by each section?
No, we actually had to trick the viewer a little bit in that case because when you're going around the corner, you have to then move the sunlight.
Yeah.
So, and because your layout is so large, you're not going to be able to see all of it, take it all in at the same time. So we did work in sections as far as the sunlight, but the sunlight was always coming from the same direction. With a really large backdrop like that, you're going to have to play around with the sunlight. If you have literally the sunlight in the center of the room, and everything it emanates outwards, I guess that's the only way that it would be consistent around your whole room. Otherwise, you're going to have to fudge it just a little bit when you go around the corner.
Because I know where it was under one of the bright lights.
Yeah.
Then you used that to your advantage and said, we'll make that a little lighter, so you get a double effect. The painting was lighter, but the light made it lighter too.
Lighting,
and it really makes a nice.
It makes
nice
a big
effect,
difference to work with the lighting that you have in the. And that's another thing too, is that if you spend time doing all this, the lighting don't just light your backdrop or don't just light your layout, but light the backdrop as well, because that light will help, enhance the whole experience of the layout. So, and then these are just dabs that go down the bark. Now, if you had like a pine tree, for instance, now again, your pine tree would, build it right from the. Start down here. Start with a trunk, the whole trunk, like this. Don't skimp on the trunk. Gotta be there. Okay. And then, now a pine tree, depending on what kind, there's millions of different kinds of trees, but the kind that I was just looking at today, the branches kind of went down like this. Okay. And I just kind of roll the brush a little bit, and it makes that, you know how the branches are kind of gnarly? You know, they're not sticks, they're not straight lines, but they've got a little bit of a gnarly twist to them. And then there's some that just stick out with nothing on them. Okay? So I'm building that tree. There's no pine needles on there yet, but you've got to make all these decisions initially. Okay? And then on some pine trees, you've got branches that kind of extend out longer than the ones at the bottom. Have you ever seen that, like in the, you know, in the mountains up in the Adirondacks? Some of these trees like that. And then you're going to want to just put the needles on the same way that you put the leaves on, but this time your needles grow in bunches. You know, needles kind of go in, your brush stroke is going to look like little needle bunches. So again, just go out and take a look. See how they look when they're growing. Need more water on this. And I'm not even using, I'm using, again, all my colors. Blues will be more prominent in a pine tree because you've got, like, you know, literally like blue spruce. It's a blue tree. It has a bluish tinge to it. So then you just have your brush. So see how the brush on this tree was like dabs, because that's the way that the leaves are formed. And then these, the needles on the tree are just like little strokes like that. And they're very wispy. You know, you don't have to go in and do each little pine needle, of course. And you've got like kind of a bunch on top like that. But the bunches grow in little groups. So you can, you know, take a group like this and make them as sparse or as dense as you want. And then after that's all done, then you would go in and add the highlights. You can't add highlights without knowing where the leaves are. And you're kind of winging it with the leaves. So add the highlights at the very end. And then you've also got, don't forget, when you look at a tree, the tree trunk is here, and you've got branches going out this way, and you've got branches going out this way, but there's some that are going out straight forward and back. So don't forget those either, and that's best done just right over the trunk. Just kind of do a big grouping right over the whole trunk like that. It's coming out at you. So, and that's going to make it look like it's round, like it's three-dimensional, because that's what it would look like. And you'd have more needles in the middle because you'd just have more in the middle than on the very edge. And don't forget the highlights on this, just like we did up here. They're just a different stroke, but it's the same idea. I've used all the same colors for both trees. And then highlights.
I tried to make trees that look like Dick brought down there, but they turned out looking like what you paint. Geez, maybe I'm doing better than I thought I was.
Remember, this is all O scale up here on the.
I think that's FN3 up there.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions or comments or?
Amy, why don't you touch on the concept of layers?
Yes.
A little deeper than that, because you know it's where you paint all of your back. Your sky in first, and then layer from there. Everything is backwards, if you would. Yeah,
absolutely. When you start, I was just commenting that I think I spent more time on the sky than any other element in that mural, and because the sky was the first thing to go on, it's the most important as far as execution because it's got to be smooth. Sky doesn't have any. You look up in the sky and there's clouds and there's obstructions, but you're not going to see a big brush stroke in the sky. So really had to make that smooth, and it took a lot of work, a lot of wet on wet, and a lot of blending.
Were you using a brush or a
I was
roller?
using a brush, and I was using a much bigger brush.
Not
like
a 4-inch brush.
Not a 4-inch brush, but much bigger than this. The biggest brush I ever use is a 1-inch brush, which I know sounds ridiculous.
To paint that whole wall?
To paint that whole wall, 1-inch brush.
How long did that take you? 14 days.
14 painting days.
14 painting days.
Now there was days well, we didn't really do a whole lot of preliminary painting, did we?
No, because we started with photographs.
That's right.
Photographs, and then
but
it was scary the first couple days because it's just like plain paint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you do mine
and you
in
just
14
don't,
days?
I work really fast.
Don't take him up on that.
I work really fast, but anyway, it went very quickly. I mean, from the time we like started that, the sky, but the sky goes on. The sky does not have an underpainting, and the reason why is because the sky goes on forever. There's nothing behind it. That sky needs to be as clean and clear as, in this instance, it was a nice sunny day. It was in the summertime. So that sky is going to go on to the galaxies. So there's no underpainting on the sky.
Did you use an underbase for the sky, or just put the sky right over the wall
I put it
paint?
right over the wall paint.
Ron, hold up the picture.